Michelle Thompson gazed out the small oval window as the boarding process continued around her. At 32 weeks pregnant, her back ached from standing in the security line, but the discomfort couldn't dampen her excitement. After months of planning, she was finally heading to Atlanta to prepare the nursery with her mother-in-law before the baby arrived. She adjusted the pregnancy support band beneath her flowing blue dress and took a deep breath, trying to find a comfortable position in the cramped economy seat. "Excuse me," said an older gentleman with kind eyes, pointing to the window seat beside her. Michelle smiled and stood awkwardly to let him pass. As she eased back down, she felt the baby kick vigorously. "Someone's excited to fly," she laughed, placing her hand on her rounded belly. The plane filled quickly around them. Michelle had specifically requested an aisle seat when booking, knowing she'd need to use the bathroom frequently. She'd also arranged for a special meal due to her gestational diabetes, something her doctor had been quite firm about managing properly. When the main cabin door closed with a heavy thunk, Michelle breathed a sigh of relief. The middle seat between her and the gentleman remained empty, a small mercy on the packed flight. She scrolled through her phone one last time before airplane mode, sending a quick message to her husband James. "Boarding complete. Miss you already. Love you." James had been supposed to fly with her, but his meeting in Chicago had run long. As an aviation executive with significant influence in the industry, he rarely missed flights, but today's emergency had been unavoidable. "I'll be on the next flight out," he had promised. "Just a few hours behind you." As the flight attendants began their safety demonstration, Michelle noticed one particular crew member, a woman with a tight blonde bun and sharp features who seemed to be scanning the cabin with unusual intensity. Their eyes met briefly, and Michelle felt an unexpected chill at the woman's cold stare before she continued down the aisle. Once they reached cruising altitude, Michelle pressed her call button. She needed to confirm her special meal and perhaps get some water. The button remained unanswered for 15 minutes before the same blonde flight attendant appeared, looking irritated. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice clipped and unwelcoming. "I just wanted to confirm my special meal," Michelle explained politely. "I'm pregnant and have gestational diabetes. I pre-ordered when I booked the ticket." The flight attendant, Karen, according to her name tag, narrowed her eyes. "We're very busy right now. You'll get your meal when we serve everyone else." "I understand," Michelle said, trying to stay calm, "but my doctor was very specific about timing my meals. I just need to know when to expect it so I can take my medication." Something in Karen's expression hardened. "Look, we don't give special treatment. You'll get your food when everyone else does." The man in the window seat looked up from his book, frowning at the flight attendant's tone. Michelle felt her cheeks warming with embarrassment as nearby passengers began to notice the exchange. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Michelle explained. "I have a medical need that was approved when I booked." "You people always want exceptions," Karen muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Michelle froze. "Excuse me? What do you mean by you people?" The cabin seemed to grow quieter as Karen leaned closer. "You heard me. Always making demands, expecting to be treated differently." Michelle was speechless. The implication was unmistakable, and several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young woman across the aisle had already taken out her phone and was discreetly recording. "I just need information about my meal," Michelle repeated, her voice shaking slightly. "That's all I'm asking for." Karen's face twisted with an anger that seemed wildly disproportionate. "I've had enough of this attitude," she snapped, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Then, without warning, her hand shot out and struck Michelle across the face. The slap wasn't particularly hard, but the shock of it, the violation, the public humiliation, was devastating. Michelle's hand went to her cheek as gasps erupted throughout the cabin. Phones came out immediately, recording the aftermath as Michelle sat stunned, tears welling in her eyes. "She hit her," someone exclaimed. "Did you see that? She hit a pregnant woman." Karen seemed momentarily frozen by her own actions, then quickly composed herself. "She was being disruptive and grabbed my uniform," she announced loudly. "I was defending myself. It was a blatant lie, and everyone nearby knew it." The young woman who had been recording stood up. "That's not what happened. I have it on video. You slapped her for no reason." Other passengers joined in, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. Michelle sat silently, one hand on her cheek, the other protectively covering her belly as tears streamed down her face. The baby was kicking frantically, responding to her surge of stress hormones. "I need to speak to the captain," Michelle finally managed to say through her tears. "Please, I need to report what just happened." Karen's expression flashed with something like panic before hardening again. "The captain is busy flying the plane. I'll file an incident report when we land." Another flight attendant, a younger woman who looked deeply uncomfortable, approached. "Karen, what's going on?" "There's a disturbance." "Nothing I can't handle," Karen replied curtly. This passenger was being aggressive. "It's under control now." Michelle couldn't believe what she was hearing. "She slapped me," she said to the new flight attendant, "for asking about my meal. Please, I need help." The second flight attendant looked uncertainly between them, clearly torn. Before she could respond, another call button chimed and Karen gestured sharply. "We have other passengers to attend to. This matter is closed until we land." As they moved away, passengers around Michelle offered tissues, words of support, and their contact information as witnesses. The young woman who had been recording came over and knelt beside Michelle's seat. "I got the whole thing," she said quietly. "I'm sending it to my cloud storage right now so they can't make me delete it." "This isn't right. Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" Michelle shook her head, though her cheek still stung. What hurt more was the injustice, the humiliation, and the fear of what might happen next. With trembling hands, she took out her phone again and, ignoring the airplane mode requirement, sent a desperate text to James. "Emergency. Flight attendant just slapped me. Crew covering it up. They don't know who you are." What should I do? What no one on that plane realized was that James Thompson wasn't just any concerned husband. He was the newly appointed senior vice president of airline operations for the parent company that owned this very airline, and his response would come much sooner, and in a much more direct manner than anyone could have anticipated. The atmosphere in the cabin had changed dramatically. What had started as a routine flight had transformed into a tense standoff. Michelle sat rigid in her seat, feeling the stares of other passengers. Some offered sympathetic glances while others whispered among themselves, reconstructing what they had witnessed. The young woman who had recorded the incident, Lily, she had introduced herself, sat nearby, having switched seats with another passenger to stay close to Michelle. "They can't just get away with this," Lily said quietly. "That was assault. And the way she spoke to you before?" Michelle nodded silently, her hand still protectively cradling her belly. The baby had settled somewhat, but she could feel her own heart racing. As a black woman, she had experienced microaggressions before, but nothing this blatant, this physical. The shock was still washing over her in waves. 2 rows ahead, another flight attendant, not Karen, was serving drinks, deliberately avoiding eye contact with anyone near Michelle's row. The conspiracy of silence was almost as painful as the slap itself. "Ma'am," an older woman across the aisle leaned toward Michelle. "I'm a retired nurse. Are you feeling all right? Any contractions or unusual movement from the baby?" Michelle shook her head. "Just kicking. I think we're okay." "Good, but stress isn't good for either of you. Would you like me to try speaking with the head flight attendant? This needs to be addressed properly." Before Michelle could respond, her phone vibrated in her hand. Shielding the screen from view, she read James's response. "Where are you exactly? Still at the gate or in the air?" She typed quickly. "Still at gate. Departure delayed 30 min for minor maintenance issue. Door still open." The 3 dots appeared immediately as James typed his reply. "Don't do anything, stay calm." "I'm coming. I've minutes." Michelle felt a surge of relief mixed with apprehension. James was usually the calmest person she knew, methodical, measured, diplomatic. But she had never heard the fury in his voice that she imagined would be there now. In their 6 years of marriage, she had never seen him truly angry. Today might be the first. At the front of the cabin, there seemed to be some commotion. The head flight attendant, a tall man with graying temples, was huddled with Karen and 2 others, speaking in hushed but intense tones. Karen's face had lost some of its confidence, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Lily noticed it too. "Something's happening," she whispered. "They look worried." The retired nurse nodded. "They should be. In my 40 years of flying, I've never seen anything like this. Completely unprofessional." Other passengers had formed a active bubble around Michelle. A businessman offered her his water bottle. A college student asked if she wanted to use his travel pillow for better support. The small kindnesses brought fresh tears to her eyes. Not of humiliation this time, but of gratitude. The plane's intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the continued delay. We're still addressing a minor issue, but we should be underway shortly. Flight attendants, please prepare for final cross-check. The announcement seemed to galvanize the crew. They dispersed quickly, Karen heading toward the back of the plane while the others resumed their positions. The head flight attendant approached Michelle's row, his expression carefully neutral. Ma'am, I understand there was some kind of misunderstanding earlier. I want to assure you that we take passenger comfort very seriously. Perhaps we could discuss this privately after we land. Michelle met his gaze steadily. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Your flight attendant made a racist comment and then slapped me. Multiple passengers witnessed it and recorded it. His professional smile faltered slightly. I'm sure there's been some confusion. Karen is one of our most experienced crew members. But as I said, we can discuss this after. He was interrupted by a commotion at the front of the plane. All heads turned to see a man in a crisp suit being escorted down the jetway by the gate agent. Even from a distance, Michelle could see the controlled intensity in her husband's stride. James Thompson was not a physically imposing man. Average height, with thoughtful eyes behind stylish glasses and the kind of calm demeanor that put others at ease. But as he stepped onto the aircraft, there was an unmistakable authority in his presence that made everyone take notice. The head flight attendant turned, annoyed at the interruption. Sir, we're preparing for departure. You'll need to exit the aircraft immediately. James ignored him completely, his eyes scanning the cabin until they found Michelle. When he saw the redness on her cheek and the tears still drying on her face, something hardened in his expression. He moved directly to her side, kneeling in the aisle. Are you okay? He asked softly, touching her face gently. Michelle nodded, relief flooding through her. I'm fine. The baby's fine. But James? He squeezed her hand reassuringly before standing to face the head flight attendant, who was now approaching with increased urgency. Sir, you need to leave the aircraft now or I'll be forced to call security. James reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, handing it to the man without a word. The flight attendant glanced at it, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock in an instant. Mr. Thompson, we weren't expecting, he stammered. Clearly not, James replied, his voice dangerously quiet. Where is the flight attendant who assaulted my wife? The cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger was watching the drama unfold, many with phones discreetly recording. The head flight attendant swallowed hard. Sir, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We have procedures for handling passenger complaints. I'm not interested in procedures right now, James cut him off. I want to speak with the flight attendant in question. The captain and you in the jetway immediately. Mr. Thompson, we're scheduled for departure. Not anymore, you're not, James said firmly. This flight isn't going anywhere until I understand exactly what happened to my wife. From the back of the plane, Karen had reappeared, freezing when she saw James. Something in her expression suggested she might have recognized him, or at least his name on the manifest, which she would have reviewed before boarding. James spotted her and gestured. You, now. The other passengers watched in stunned silence as Karen moved stiffly up the aisle. As she passed Michelle's row, Lily stood up, phone in hand. I have the video, she told James. She slapped your wife after making a racist comment. I have it all. Other passengers chimed in immediately. We all saw it. Completely unprovoked. She said, you people always want exceptions. James nodded his thanks to them all, his expression grim. I appreciate your support. I'll need statements from as many of you as possible. He turned to the head flight attendant. I want the captain out here now, and I want all the flight attendants from this crew in the jetway. My wife will stay here with these good people watching over her. The head flight attendant looked as though he might protest, then thought better of it. Yes, sir. Right away. As the crew members filed toward the front of the plane, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted again. There was a sense of justice being served, of wrongs being righted. Michelle watched her husband, seeing a side of him she'd rarely witnessed before. This was James in his professional element, the calm, decisive executive who had risen quickly through the ranks because of his fairness and integrity. Before following the crew into the jetway, he leaned down to kiss Michelle's forehead. This ends today, he promised. All of it. As he disappeared through the cabin door, the other passengers erupted in quiet conversation, piecing together what was happening. The retired nurse patted Michelle's hand. Your husband, she said with a knowing smile, is about to make airline history. In the cramped confines of the jetway, James Thompson faced the assembled flight crew. The captain, a veteran pilot with salt and pepper hair and decades of experience etched into his face, had joined them, looking confused and irritated at the delay. "Someone want to tell me what the hell is going on?" the captain demanded. "We're already 30 minutes behind schedule." James stepped forward, his business card still clutched in the head flight attendant's hand. "Captain, I'm James Thompson, Senior VP of Airline Operations for the parent company. I'm here because one of your flight attendants physically assaulted my pregnant wife in full view of dozens of passengers, after making what appears to be a racially motivated comment." The captain's irritation dissolved into shock. That can't be right." He turned to Karen, who had gone pale. "Karen, what happened?" Karen straightened her uniform jacket, finding her voice. "Sir, this is being blown completely out of proportion. The passenger was being difficult about meal service. She grabbed my wrist when I tried to move away. I simply removed her hand from my person." "That's not what happened," James said evenly, "and we both know it. Multiple passengers recorded the incident. My wife never touched you. You slapped her across the face after saying, and I quote, 'You people always want exceptions.'" The younger flight attendant who had appeared after the incident shifted uncomfortably. "Karen, that's not what I saw when I came over." Karen shot her a venomous glare. "Stay out of this, Diane." James noted the interaction with interest. "Actually, Diane, I'd very much like to hear what you saw." Diane looked between Karen and the captain, clearly torn between loyalty to her colleague and the truth. Finally, she took a deep breath. The passenger, Mrs. Thompson, was just sitting there. She didn't grab anyone. Karen did slap her. "I saw it as I was coming up the aisle." The captain closed his eyes briefly as if physically pained. "Jesus, Karen, she was being difficult," Karen insisted, her voice rising. "These entitled passengers think they can make demands and get special treatment just because what?" James interrupted, his voice razor sharp. "Just because they're black? Just because they have medical needs that were properly documented and approved? Please finish your thought." Karen fell silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. The head flight attendant stepped in. "Mr. Thompson, regardless of what happened, I'm sure we can resolve this without further disruption to the flight. Perhaps a goodwill voucher for future travel." James turned to him with an incredulous expression. "A voucher? Your employee assaulted my pregnant wife, made a racist remark and then lied about it, and you think a travel voucher is an appropriate response?" "Sir, I understand you're upset." "I'm not upset," James corrected him. "I'm furious, but more importantly, I'm in a position to do something about the culture that allowed this to happen." He addressed the entire group. "This flight is canceled." The captain stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute. You can't just—" "I can and I am," James replied without hesitation. "Captain, you'll make an announcement that this flight has been canceled due to crew issues. All passengers will deplane and be automatically rebooked on the next available flight, with meal vouchers and hotel accommodations if necessary. There are 167 passengers on board," the captain protested, "and one of them was assaulted by your crew." James countered. "Their inconvenience is regrettable but necessary. This entire flight crew is being removed from service effective immediately, pending a full investigation." A stunned silence fell over the group. The captain was the first to recover. The entire crew? Some of these people had nothing to do with the incident. James's expression remained implacable, and yet none of them intervened. None of them reported it. "In fact," he gestured to the head flight attendant, "when I arrived, efforts were already underway to cover it up. That suggests a systemic problem, not an isolated incident." Karen finally found her voice again. "You can't Oh, the union won't allow it." James turned to her. "The union contract very specifically allows for immediate suspension in cases of passenger assault. As for the rest of the crew, they'll be on administrative leave with pay during the investigation, unless, of course, evidence emerges that they actively participated in attempting to conceal the incident." The younger flight attendant, Diane, looked close to tears. "Mr. Thompson, I swear I didn't know what happened until after." James held up a hand. "I understand. And your honesty just now will be noted in my report. But right now, I need all of you to collect your personal items and exit the aircraft. Airport security is already on their way to escort you to HR. As if on cue, 2 uniformed security officers appeared at the end of the jetway. The reality of the situation seemed to finally sink in for the crew. The captain, looking defeated, nodded once. "I'll make the announcement." While the crew gathered their belongings, James returned to the cabin. The passengers, who had been waiting in suspenseful silence, watched him expectantly as he made his way back to Michelle. "What's happening?" she asked quietly as he knelt beside her. "They're canceling the flight," he explained. "Everyone will be rebooked. I'm having the entire crew suspended pending investigation." A murmur ran through the nearby passengers. The businessman who had offered Michelle water leaned forward. "Sir, if I may, most of us are willing to continue with our journey if it means getting where we need to go. Perhaps just the one flight attendant could be removed." James appreciated the man's practicality but shook his head. "I understand the inconvenience and I apologize for that. But what happened here today points to deeper issues that need to be addressed." The crew leadership attempted to dismiss and cover up a serious incident. "That's unacceptable." The captain's voice came over the intercom, sounding strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected crew situation, this flight is being canceled. Please gather your belongings and deplane in an orderly fashion. Airline representatives will meet you in the terminal to assist with rebooking. We apologize for the inconvenience." As passengers began collecting their things, many stopped to offer words of support to Michelle. The young woman, Lily, exchanged contact information with her. "I'll send you the video," she promised, "and I'm happy to make a statement if you need it." James helped Michelle to her feet, keeping a supportive arm around her waist. As they made their way to the front of the plane, they passed Karen, who was collecting her bag from an overhead bin. Their eyes met briefly, and James saw not remorse but resentment in her gaze. In the terminal, chaos reigned as airline staff scrambled to address the sudden influx of passengers needing rebooking. James guided Michelle to a quiet corner and made a phone call. "This is Thompson," he said when the call connected. "I need a car to take my wife home, and I need the executive team assembled for an emergency meeting." "Yes, virtual is fine for those not in Chicago." He listened briefly. "No, this can't wait until tomorrow. It's happening now." As he ended the call, Michelle touched his arm. "James, what are you doing?" He met her gaze, his determination evident. "What happened to you today isn't just about one flight attendant with a bad attitude. It's about a culture that emboldens people like her and protects them when they cross the line. The crew is ready to gaslight you, to make you doubt what happened." "I know," Michelle said softly. "But suspending the entire crew, that's a big move." "It's just the beginning," James replied. "By this time tomorrow, everyone in the company will know exactly what happened and exactly how seriously we take it. No cover-ups, no quiet settlements, no brushing things under the rug." Michelle knew her husband well enough to recognize the resolution in his voice. This wasn't just about defending her, though that was certainly part of it. This was about the principles he had always stood for, the changes he had been working to implement since taking his new position. "What about the passengers?" she asked, watching the growing lines at the customer service desk. James smiled slightly. "They'll be taken care of. In fact," he made another quick call, "I need every available customer service representative at Gate 23, and authorize meal vouchers for all passengers from Flight 1457, plus hotel accommodations for anyone with a next-day connection." As airport staff began to respond to his directives, Michelle leaned against his shoulder, suddenly exhausted by the day's events. "I just wanted to visit your mother and set up the nursery," she sighed. James kissed the top of her head. "And you will. But first, we're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." As they waited for their car, Michelle couldn't help but think about the unlikely series of events that had brought them to this moment. If James hadn't been delayed at his meeting, if she hadn't been assigned to Karen's section of the plane, if the flight hadn't been delayed for maintenance. "What are you thinking?" James asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes," Michelle replied, placing his hand on her belly where their child kicked steadily, "things happen exactly the way they're supposed to." The corporate headquarters buzzed with unusual energy for a weekend. James had called an emergency meeting of the executive team, and word had spread quickly about the reason. By the time he arrived, having ensured Michelle was safely home and resting, the conference room was filled with concerned faces, some in person, others joining via video from across the country. "I'll get straight to the point," James began, his voice steady despite his lingering anger. Today, one of our flight attendants physically assaulted a pregnant passenger after making what can only be interpreted as a racist remark. When the passenger, my wife, requested assistance, the flight crew's immediate response was to close ranks and attempt to dismiss the incident. He played Lily's video on the large screen. The footage was clear. Michelle politely asking about her meal, Karen's increasingly hostile responses, the shocking slap, and the immediate aftermath. The room fell silent as the video ended. "This is unacceptable on every level," James continued. The assault itself, the racist undertone, the crew's response, all of it speaks to systemic issues that we can no longer ignore. The CEO, a woman in her early 60s who had built her reputation on transforming troubled companies, leaned forward. "I agree completely, James. What steps have you taken so far?" "I've suspended the entire crew pending investigation. The flight was canceled and all passengers have been rebooked. I've also initiated a formal HR complaint against the flight attendant in question." The Chief Human Resources Officer cleared his throat. "James, while I understand your personal connection to this incident, we do have established protocols." "With all due respect," James interrupted, "those protocols are part of the problem. They're designed to minimize liability, not address the root issues. How many similar incidents have been quietly settled and swept under the rug? How many passengers have been gaslit into thinking their experiences don't matter?" The question hung in the air uncomfortably. After a moment, the head of flight operations spoke up. "I've pulled Karen Winter's personnel file. There have been 3 previous complaints against her in the past year alone, all from minority passengers, all dismissed for insufficient evidence." James wasn't surprised. "And the head flight attendant, Tom Reynolds?" 2 formal reprimands for failing to properly document passenger complaints," the HR director admitted. "But he's been with the company for 20 years, which suggests the problem is deeply entrenched," James pointed out. "This isn't about a few bad apples. It's about a culture that protects employees at the expense of passenger safety and dignity." The CEO nodded thoughtfully. "What do you propose, James?" He had been thinking about this since the moment he'd seen the video. "First, we fire Karen Winters immediately, for cause. No severance, no negotiation. No one objected. Second, we suspend the entire flight crew for a minimum of 2 weeks while we investigate their role in the attempted cover-up. Those found to have actively participated will be terminated. Those who simply failed to intervene will undergo comprehensive retraining." The chief financial officer shifted uncomfortably. "That's going to be expensive, James, and the union might push back." "I've already reviewed the contract," James replied. "We're on solid ground legally. As for the cost, what's the cost to our reputation if this video goes viral? What's the cost of continuing to employ people who think it's acceptable to discriminate against our customers?" The CEO raised a hand to stop further objections. "James is right. We can't put a price on doing the right thing here. What else? Third," James continued, "we implement immediate changes to our training protocols. Every employee, from the boardroom to the baggage handlers, undergoes comprehensive anti-bias training. Not just once, but annually. That's going to take time to develop." The HR director noted. "Then we start today," James replied firmly. "We bring in the best consultants in the industry. We make this our top priority. And fourth?" the CEO prompted, clearly anticipating more. "Fourth," James said, his voice softening slightly as he thought of Michelle. "We make this public. No NDAs, no confidential settlements, no hiding behind corporate speak. We acknowledge what happened, we apologize sincerely, and we commit to transparent, measurable change." This suggestion met with more resistance. The General Counsel raised immediate concerns about liability, potential lawsuits, and shareholder confidence. The PR director worried about the impact on bookings and the company's image. James listened to their objections patiently, then responded, "I understand the risks, but I believe the greater risk lies in continuing as we have been. Every day, passengers entrust us with not just their safety, but their dignity. When we violate that trust, we have an obligation to make it right, publicly and completely." The CEO studied him for a long moment, then turned to the room. "James is our senior VP of airline operations for a reason. His integrity and vision are exactly what we need right now." She stood, signaling her decision. "We'll proceed with all 4 recommendations, effective immediately. I want hourly updates on the investigation and daily reports on our training development." As the meeting adjourned and executives filed out, The CEO held James back. "How is your wife doing?" she asked, her professional demeanor softening with genuine concern. "She's shaken," James admitted, "but she's incredibly resilient. She's more concerned about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The CEO smiled slightly. "She sounds like someone I'd like to meet someday. You know, when we brought you on board 6 months ago, some people questioned whether you had enough experience for this role." She gestured to the now empty conference room. "I think you just proved them wrong." James nodded his thanks, but his mind was already moving forward to implementation. As he left the building, his phone buzzed with a message from Michelle. "News about the flight cancellation is already online. Some passengers are mentioning the incident. What happens now?" He texted back, "Now we fix it." All of it, and he meant it. James had built his career on the belief that integrity wasn't just a personal virtue, but a business necessity. What had happened to Michelle was horrifying, but perhaps it had happened to exactly the right person. Someone married to a man who could actually drive institutional change. The following morning, as he and Michelle sat at their kitchen table reviewing the draft of the company's public statement, his phone rang. It was Lily, the young woman who had recorded the incident. "Mr. Thompson, I just wanted to check how your wife is doing." "She's doing well, thank you. And please call me James." "There's something else," Lily said. "The video?" "It's getting shared. A lot. Someone recognized you from the airline's leadership page and connected the dots. It's starting to go viral." James exchanged a glance with Michelle, who nodded her encouragement. "That's okay, Lily. We were planning to address this publicly anyway. Your video is helping to ensure accountability." After the call ended, Michelle touched his hand. "Are you ready for this? Once that statement goes out, there's no going back." James looked at his wife. This extraordinary woman who, even after being humiliated and assaulted, was thinking about the bigger picture, about lasting change. "I've never been more ready for anything," he answered honestly. "This isn't just about what happened to you. It's about all the passengers who didn't have someone to stand up for them, who didn't have evidence, who weren't believed." Michelle's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of pride and determination, not sadness or fear. "Then let's do this." James sent the approved statement to the PR team with a simple message. "Release immediately. No edits." Within an hour, it would be on every major news outlet in the country. The story exploded across social media and news outlets with unexpected speed. By midday, our flight attendant slap was trending nationwide, with the video accumulating millions of views. But unlike the usual corporate scandals that followed a predictable arc of outrage, denial, and eventual hollow apology, this one took a different turn. The airline's statement, written largely by James himself, was direct and unequivocal. "Yesterday, one of our flight attendants assaulted a pregnant passenger after making a racist remark. There is no excuse for this behavior, and it violates everything we stand for as a company. We have terminated the employee involved and suspended the entire crew, pending further investigation. We are implementing immediate changes to our training and reporting procedures to ensure this never happens again. We extend our deepest apologies to the passenger involved and to everyone who has experienced discrimination or disrespect while traveling with us." The transparency was unprecedented. No corporate doublespeak, no passive voice removing accountability, no vague promises of doing better. Just a clear acknowledgement of wrongdoing and concrete steps to address it. Michelle, who had initially wanted to remain anonymous, decided to share her experience in a single, thoughtful social media post. She described not just the incident itself, but the systemic issues it highlighted. How Black women's medical concerns were often dismissed, how everyday racism manifested in unexpected places, and how institutions typically responded to such incidents with denial rather than accountability. "What happened to me wasn't unique," she wrote. "What was unique was that I had evidence, witnesses, and a husband in a position to demand immediate action. Most people don't have those advantages. That needs to change." The response to her post was overwhelming. Women from across the country, particularly Black women, shared similar experiences, not just on planes, but in hospitals, restaurants, stores, and workplaces. What had begun as an isolated incident was evolving into a national conversation about dignity, respect, and institutional responsibility. 3 days after the incident, Michelle sat in the living room of their Chicago apartment. watching James prepare for his television interview. It would be his first public comment since the company statement was released. "Are you nervous?" she asked, adjusting the collar of his shirt. James smiled. "A little. But mostly I'm glad we're having this conversation openly instead of trying to control the narrative or minimize what happened." "The airline's stock dropped yesterday," Michelle noted. "The board must be putting pressure on you." "Actually," James replied, "the CEO called this morning to say that new bookings are up. Apparently our response is resonating with people tired of corporate hypocrisy. Who knew integrity could be good for business?" Michelle laughed softly, then grew serious. "Have you heard anything about Karen?" James nodded. "Her union initially tried to fight the termination, but after the video went public, they withdrew their objection. 2 more passengers have come forward with complaints about her from previous flights. And the rest of the crew? The investigation is ongoing. Diane, the younger flight attendant who spoke up, has provided a detailed statement confirming that the head flight attendant instructed the crew to manage the situation and not escalate by acknowledging wrongdoing." Michelle wasn't surprised. "So they were deliberately covering it up." "It appears so," James confirmed. "But the silver lining is that 4 other flight attendants from different crews have come forward with similar stories about pressures to minimize or ignore passenger complaints, particularly from people of color." Michelle placed a hand on her belly, feeling their daughter kick vigorously. "So maybe something good will come from this after all." "It already has," James assured her. "The new training program launches next week. We're implementing an independent passenger advocacy office that reports directly to the board, not to operations. And we're revising our hiring practices to build more diverse flight crews." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the TV news crew. As they set up in the living room, the producer approached Michelle. "Mrs. Thompson, would you be willing to appear on camera with your husband? Your perspective would be incredibly valuable." Michelle hesitated. She had deliberately kept a low profile, wanting the focus to be on the systemic issues rather than her personal experience. But perhaps there was value in showing her face in being more than just the black pregnant woman from the viral video. "Just a few questions at the end," the producer promised. "On your terms." James squeezed her hand supportively. "Entirely your call." Michelle thought about all the messages she'd received from women who had faced similar situations with no recourse, no platform, no voice. She nodded. "Yes, I'll do it." The interview began with James explaining the immediate steps the airline had taken, the terminations, suspensions, new training protocols, and the establishment of the Passenger Advocacy Office. He was direct, thoughtful, and unapologetically committed to substantive change. When Michelle joined him for the final segment, the interviewer asked why she had decided to speak publicly. "Because accountability shouldn't be exceptional," she answered simply. "It should be expected. What happened to me was shocking not just because of the assault itself, but because the system was so ready to dismiss it, to explain it away. That's the real story here. Not one flight attendant's actions, but an entire culture that enables such behavior." The interviewer nodded thoughtfully. "And yet in this case, the system ultimately worked. The employee was fired, the airline acknowledged the problem openly." "Do you think that's a sign of progress?" Michelle considered the question carefully. "It worked because the video went viral. Because my husband happens to be an airline executive. Because the timing aligned in just the right way. That's not a system working. That's a lucky exception. Real progress will come when accountability doesn't depend on having connections or viral evidence." As the interview concluded, James and Michelle sat together on their couch, hands intertwined, presenting a united front not just as husband and wife, but as allies in a larger cause. Later that evening, as news reports about the interview began to circulate, Michelle received a message from Lily, the young woman who had recorded the incident. "You two are changing things. The conversation is different this time." Michelle showed the message to James, who was reviewing applications for the new Passenger Advocacy Director position. "Is it, though?" she wondered aloud. "Is the conversation really different? Or will this all be forgotten in a week when the next outrage captures everyone's attention?" James set aside his laptop. "Maybe that's up to us. This doesn't have to end with policy changes at one airline. This could be the beginning of something bigger." Michelle raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that your voice is powerful. that your perspective matters, that maybe you could help shape how companies approach these issues, not just in airlines but across industries. The idea was intriguing. Michelle had taken a leave from her position as an education consultant as her pregnancy progressed, but she had always been passionate about institutional change. A consultant on corporate culture and bias? She mused. That wasn't exactly in my 5-year plan. Neither was having our unborn daughter witness airline history, James pointed out with a smile. Sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we never planned to take. Michelle looked down at their joined hands, at the life growing inside her, at the unexpected path that had opened before them. What had begun as a traumatic incident had transformed into an opportunity, not just for their family, but potentially for countless others who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Maybe, she said softly, this is exactly the journey we're supposed to be on. 6 months later, as Michelle stood at a podium addressing the annual conference of the National Association of Corporate Directors, their daughter Zora, named for the writer Zora Neale Hurston, slept peacefully in James's arms at the back of the room. On the screen behind Michelle was the title of her keynote address, Beyond Viral Accountability, Building Cultures of Dignity and Respect. The flight attendant's slap had been painful and humiliating, but like ripples expanding outward from a stone dropped in still water, its impact had spread far beyond that moment of cruelty to touch countless lives, to change entrenched systems, and to transform one family's trauma into a powerful force for lasting change. Sometimes, Michelle reflected as she looked out at the audience of corporate leaders eager to learn from her experience. Justice arrives in unexpected ways, and sometimes when one door is forcibly closed or slapped shut, another opens wide enough to change the world.